Hey guys, tonight we begin with the soft hum of bees and the lazy curl of smoke drifting from a clay-walled hut in the Ethiopian highlands. The morning mist still hangs low over the hills and everything smells like wildflowers, firewood, and fermentation. You're not in a lab. You're not even in a winery. You're in a backyard just behind a kitchen where something golden, fragrant, and lightly bubbling rests in an old ceramic jar. This is Tej, Ethiopia's ancient honey wine. And you probably won't survive the story, not because it's dangerous, but because it's so soothing that your eyelids will start getting heavy before we even get to the fermentation process. There are no sharp plot twists here, just microbes, clay pots, beeswax, and people who have zero interest in marketing their drink to the global economy. You've never met a beverage with less hustle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing where this sleepy science finds you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing just inside the doorway of a traditional tukul, a round, thatched roof home that keeps the Ethiopian highland chill at bay. Somewhere behind you, a kettle simmers on an open flame, but in front of you, sitting on a low wooden table, is a curious bottle. It's squat, wide-bottomed. The neck is long and narrow. There's no label, no cork, just a sliver of banana leaf folded over the top. You lift it gently, and inside is something slow. Tej is not like other drinks. It's not mass-produced. It doesn't come in sparkling cans with matte finishes and questionable health claims. It doesn't even pretend to be consistent. It's slightly different every time because it's brewed by memory, not recipe. Mainstream scientific fact: Tej is a naturally fermented honey wine made using raw honey, water, and a plant called gesho, an Ethiopian shrub with properties similar to hops. The fermentation process relies on wild yeast and bacteria introduced from the environment, the container, and the honey itself. Which means every batch is as much a product of place as it is a person. You tilt the bottle. The liquid moves thickly, golden, hazy, with a few lazy bubbles drifting to the surface. You raise it to your nose. It smells like summer, like something sweet and wild and maybe slightly rebellious. There's a woman sitting by the fire. She made this batch 2 weeks ago, or maybe 4. She can't remember exactly, but she knows it's ready because it sounds right. The bubbles stopped popping, the flavor mellowed, the surface grew calm. She nods and you take a sip. It's sweet, then sharp, then earthy in a way you can't explain. There's a hint of smoke, or is that from the fire? And somewhere, a distant funk that makes you think of cheese in a pleasant, confusing way. You blink. It's good, not perfect. But this, honest, quirky tidbit: some families in Ethiopia pass down their fermentation vessels through generations, believing the clay pots themselves teach the next batch how to brew properly. Scientists call it microbial inoculation. Grandmothers call it common sense. You set the bottle down gently. This is how it begins. Not with innovation, but with observation. A little honey, a little leaf, and a lot of not rushing things. Which, by the way, is the opposite of how most alcoholic drinks get famous. Because Tej isn't just a beverage, it's a rhythm, a process, a timeline that refuses to follow quarterly marketing goals or shelf stability tests. You lean back on a woven cushion, feeling the heat of the fire on your shins and the slow swirl of honey wine in your bloodstream. Outside, bees return to the hives, their legs heavy with pollen. Inside, no one is hurrying. And as you close your eyes, the line between science and story begins to blur. just like the edges of the glass. You're still seated in that cozy corner, bottle resting beside you, and now your host, a woman in a cotton-wrapped skirt and weather-softened sandals, leans over and hands you a small clay cup. It's warm from her palms. You realize this is the proper way to drink tej, not from the bottle like some impatient tourist, but slowly, thoughtfully, from a vessel that fits perfectly into your relaxed, barely awake grip. She tells you that the recipe has no name. It's not written anywhere, not even carved onto a wall or passed around on papyrus. It lives in memory, in motion, in the practiced tilt of honey, the measured swirl of water, the snap of gesho stems breaking into the jar, and above all, in patience. So much patience that you begin to wonder if the real ingredient in tej isn't honey, but time. You swirl the golden liquid. There's something in its slowness that feels intentional. Every batch of tej is a gamble, but one that never feels risky. Maybe it's because the people who brew it don't need it to be perfect. They just want it to be alive. Mainstream scientific fact: the fermentation of tej can take anywhere from a few days to several weeks, depending on ambient temperature, honey concentration, and the microbial environment. The resulting alcohol content ranges between 6% and 12%, similar to beer or light wine. But if you ask the locals how strong it is, they'll shrug and say, "Depends on the bees," which isn't scientifically precise, but also kind of poetic. You take another sip. There's something else happening in this drink, and it's not just alcohol. It's flavor with personality. Some sips feel sharper, others taste like chamomile. Occasionally you'll detect something almost meaty, like a fermented fig had an identity crisis and came out with a floral finish. Fringe tidbit: in some rural areas, brewers sing to their jars of tej. It's not for the yeast, it's for the rhythm, because timing fermentation by lunar cycles, prayer schedules, and gut instinct has been more reliable than modern thermometers. No one rushes tea, and that's why no one exports it. Because when you ask how long it takes to ferment, the answers range from just enough to when it stops burping. That's not a production model, that's a lifestyle. And this lifestyle does not translate well to the speed of logistics chains, shelf-stable preservatives, or barcodes. You imagine some poor food scientist in a lab coat trying to pasteurize tej. The microbes revolt. The flavor goes flat. The jar weeps banana leaf. Back in the hut, your host laughs gently at a story her daughter tells in Amharic. You don't understand the words, but you understand the mood. Everything is relaxed. Nothing is forced. Even the conversation ferments at its own pace. You stare at the little cup in your hand. It's imperfect, maybe a little chipped on the rim, but it holds something so alive, so golden and mysterious, that you start to question how anything else on your grocery store shelf dares to call itself artisanal. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether wild fermentations like tej can be standardized without destroying their microbial complexity. Some claim it's possible with genetic tracking. Others believe the charm and safety of such brews lies precisely in their unpredictability. You look at the jar again. It doesn't care about that argument. It just exists. And so do you in this moment, barely upright, surrounded by slow laughter and the scent of honey steam and distant eucalyptus. In a world addicted to urgency, tej is an act of quiet rebellion. It refuses to be optimized, it refuses to scale, and it definitely refuses to rush. Your host tops up your cup without asking. The bees outside hum like monks. And in this rare pause, you begin to understand that the best science stories aren't always about discovery. Sometimes they're about preservation, of taste, of timing, of the deeply human decision to let nature take the lead. The next morning you wake up still hearing bees. Or maybe it's your stomach trying to translate fermented honey into dreams. Either way, you're groggy, and your first thought is, why doesn't the world know more about this drink? You sit under a thatched awning, watching the highland light warm the stone paths, and it strikes you. Tej isn't unknown. It's just unbothered. You pull out your phone to Google best Ethiopian honey wine brand, and the search results are sparse. A few dusty articles, maybe a recipe blog, but no splashy international marketing, no glossy bottles with minimalist fonts, no Tay spritzers sold at Whole Foods. And that's the point, because Tage never needed branding. Mainstream scientific fact. Global alcohol markets thrive on consistency. A modern beverage must have predictable alcohol content, stable shelf life, and mass production potential. Tej, with its wild fermentation and batch-to-batch variability, defies all three. It's hyper-local, microbiome-dependent, and occasionally explodes in transit. Not ideal for shipping containers. But here in Ethiopia, none of that matters. You watch your host from yesterday preparing another batch in a huge clay pot called a dist, casually swirling water into the honey like she's done it 1,000 times. No measuring cups, no temperature probes, just intuition and memory. You ask her if she's ever sold Tej abroad. She laughs, and then gives you the most Tej answer imaginable. If it leaves the village, it tastes like plastic. That's not a metaphor. She's referring to actual flavor degradation from storing Tej in synthetic containers. Because Tej was meant to breathe, to interact with the air, the clay, the smoke in the room, and even the hands that serve it. Fringe tidbit. In traditional markets, Tej is sometimes poured into recycled liquor bottles with banana leaf plugs instead of caps. Not because it's rustic, but because that's how the flavor stays truest. There are stories of Tej turning bitter when corked with rubber. You imagine a Western beverage distributor raising an eyebrow at that. You imagine the product development meeting. Can we make it fizzy? Add stevia? Maybe a canned version with a bee on the label? And somewhere in the highlands, a woman closes her eyes and lets the yeast do its thing. She doesn't need investors. She has patience and wildflowers and bees that work for free. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether spontaneous fermentation, like what occurs in Teji, can be safely replicated on a large scale without losing its microbial identity. Some suggest using selective yeast strains. Others warn that doing so strips away the very soul of the drink. Back under the awning, you sip a fresh glass. It tastes completely different from yesterday's. Softer, more floral. There's a note of citrus maybe, or is that just breakfast? You can't tell, and honestly, you don't care. This isn't a wine tasting. This is a moment tasting. You're not rating it. You're just living with it. And that's when it clicks. Tej isn't famous because it doesn't need fame. It doesn't want it. In a world full of drinks shouting for attention, Tej whispers, and you, jet-lagged, mildly sticky with honey, and sitting in a chair that wobbles just slightly, are listening. Later that same day, you find yourself crouched beside a weathered clay vessel, peering into the murky golden swirl of what's either about to become Tej or a bee spa day. A few winged patrons circle lazily above the rim, investigating. No one shoos them away. This is, after all, their gift too. The scent is rich, honey, yes, but also something deeper, smoky, a bit tangy, with a whisper of fermentation just starting to rise. You inhale slowly and it smells like history. You glance at the collection of ingredients scattered around the earthen courtyard. Honey, obviously, but also dried leaves from a plant called gesho, something you've never seen on a wine label. It looks like someone plucked it from a shrub that got rejected by a fancy herb garden. Bittersweet, your host explains, pinching a brittle leaf between her fingers. It replaces hops, like beer. Ah, so this isn't just wine, it's wine with attitude. Mainstream scientific fact, Gesho, Rhamnus prenoides, acts as both a bittering agent and a natural preservative. It's antimicrobial and tannic, similar to hops in beer, which means it helps control wild yeast growth and stabilize the brew. This dual role makes it a cornerstone of teji's structure and taste. You watch as the leaves are tossed into the fermenting pot like tea bags into a cauldron. No measuring, just vibes. The honey, too, isn't filtered or pasteurized. It oozes from waxy combs and is scraped straight into the mix. Bits of pollen and the occasional bee part still floating happily. You think of industrial honey back home. Strained, bleached, ultra-pure, and realize how sterile it seems now. Too clean to taste alive. Here, nothing is sanitized, and yet everything is safe. Quirky or fringe tidbit. Some tech brewers insist the clay pot must be smoked over a wood fire before fermentation begins. Not for hygiene, but for flavor. Smoke-seasoned vessels add complexity and help ward off mold. There are even debates over what wood makes the best smoke. Acacia, eucalyptus, goat poop. Yes, that's a real thing in some rural traditions. You stare at the pot, newly aware that it might have been lightly toasted with dung. Still, you'd rather drink this than a canned hard seltzer. As the brew begins its slow alchemy, bubbles rise from the depths like tiny conversations. The surface quivers. The bees return. The whole process feels like a collaboration between human, plant, microbe, and winged supervisor. Your host hands you a lid made from a woven reed mat. It's not to seal the pot airtight, it's to keep out dust while letting the brew breathe. Tej needs to exhale, she says with a wink. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether traditional open-air fermentation can reliably produce alcohol that's safe without modern sanitation. Some studies point to antimicrobial compounds in the ingredients. Others highlight risks of contamination. But local brewers insist centuries of practice are proof enough. And they have a point. You haven't seen a thermometer all day, but the fermentation temperature is just right. The air feels dry, the honey is local, the leaves are fresh. You realize this isn't a recipe, it's an ecosystem. You look around, chickens walk by, a goat sneezes, someone starts singing softly as they sweep a dirt floor. A child dips a pinky finger into the pot and giggles at the sourness. It's all very chill. No drama, no deadlines, no lab coats or clipboards. Just a bubbling jar of golden time machine, quietly transforming under the African sun. You lean back and think, maybe it didn't need to become famous. Maybe it just needed to keep existing. And so it has. You return the next morning to find the pot humming. Not literally, though honestly that wouldn't surprise you at this point, but there's a distinct presence in the courtyard, a kind of low, invisible buzz you feel more than hear. The air smells tangier now, sweetness curdled ever so slightly into something edgier, deeper, like the difference between a peach and peach yogurt. You lean over the vessel. Bubbles pop at the surface. A film is forming. A thin, iridescent layer shimmering in the light like oil on water. It's alive. Not metaphorically. Actually, literally, scientifically alive. Mainstream scientific fact. Fermentation is a microbial process where yeast consumes sugars and produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. In traditional teji, naturally occurring wild yeasts, mostly Saccharomyces species, float in from the air, the honey, and even the leaves. Unlike sterile commercial brewing, These wild ferments are unpredictable, complex, and deliciously unique to place and season. You would whisper a little "good morning" to the microbes. They ignore you. Your host joins you with a casual nod and stirs the pot with what appears to be a carved stick. "We don't measure," she says, "but we know when it smells right." It does smell right. Fruity, funky, sharp. You realize modern science would call this stage primary fermentation, but here there's no vocabulary, just noses. She hands you a spoonful to taste. You sip cautiously. It's weird. Sour sweet with a tingle, something between lemonade, ale, and biting a wet tree. "Not ready," she says, "but on the way." You nod like someone who totally understands microbial kinetics. Quirkier fringe tidbit: some Tage brewers claim they can influence fermentation by music. No kidding. Rhythmic clapping, lullabies, even drumming near the pots. "It keeps the yeast happy," one elder swears. Scientists roll their eyes, but hey, Mozart for microbes is a whole field now. You glance at the pot. Should you hum? Instead, you ask how they know when it's done. "3 days, sometimes 5, maybe 7, she shrugs. "It depends on the mood." You're starting to envy this lifestyle. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether wild fermentation is more authentic than controlled yeast strains. Some claim it's riskier, others say it preserves biodiversity. Either way, TJ brewers aren't seeking lab consistency. They're nurturing flavor through instinct, not spreadsheets. You imagine a modern brewer watching this scene through night vision goggles, trembling at the lack of sterilization. But you're starting to trust the chaos. As the day warms, the pot gurgles softly. A fruit fly lands, then buzzes off, as if rejected by the brew. The bees are back, as always, watchful, judgy. You sit on a flat stone sipping another sample. It tastes more balanced now. Less bark, more blossom, slightly effervescent. A woman nearby is straining a separate batch through a reed mat. No filter papers, no funnel, just gravity and patience. Another is bottling Tage into recycled glass jars. No labels, no expiration dates. Just a wax-sealed top and the unspoken understanding that it won't last long. It's made to be drunk, not distributed. You wonder if any of it will still be here next week. Probably not, and that's the point. Tej isn't about legacy, it's about right now. Like wild yeast, you're drifting in the breeze, landing in a place where things don't need to be perfect. They just need to bubble. You lean back again, and this time the pot does seem to hum. Or maybe it's your stomach. Either way, you're starting to get it. You wake the next day to the sound of laughter and the gentle clink of glass. The courtyard is livelier, and the unmistakable scent of fermentation hangs heavier in the air, like damp apples, wood smoke, and a whiff of something floral that might also be foot odor. Somehow it's comforting. You shuffle barefoot across the dusty path. A group is gathered around a low table. The host hands you a curious vessel, a short, round glass with no stem, no handle, just a wide belly tapering to a narrow rim. You cradle it like a delicate light bulb. "It's called a barrelé," she says, "the traditional glass for Tej." Mainstream scientific fact: the shape of a drinking vessel can affect your perception of flavor. Studies show that aroma concentration, surface area, and even rim width influence how you interpret taste. The barrelé's form directs the scent toward your nose while encouraging slow sipping, ideal for savoring Tej's complex, funky profile. You sniff. The brew is richer now, sweet but tart, with notes of grass, lemon peel, and whatever magic lives inside a beehive. You sip. It's cold, smooth, slightly fizzy. Somewhere between mead, kombucha, and a dream you had in 3rd grade about drinking a gold flower. You nod sagely. "It's good." The host laughs. That one was brewed by my aunt. She's very serious. You glance over. The aunt in question is stirring another pot while shooing away goats with a ladle. You believe the serious part. A few more guests arrive, each with their own glass. Some barrelets are amber-tinted, others slightly warped. None identical. They're not mass-produced but rather handed down, gifted, or bartered. You're told that someone once proposed selling them on Etsy. The idea died instantly. Quirky or fringe tidbit. According to local superstition, the clarity of the glass reveals the brewer's honesty. Cloudy barrelet? Cloudy intentions. Whether that's true or not, everyone still checks before sipping. Conversation flows lazily. No one's in a rush. Every sip is followed by a pause. You notice a rhythm. Drink, reflect, smile, drink again. You're falling into it. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether traditional drinking rituals enhance flavor perception or simply anchor memory. Some say it's about conditioning. Others claim it's neurochemical. Whatever the mechanism, it's clear this experience goes beyond alcohol. It's a social fermentation. You're handed a second glass, different batch, different brewer. You taste the difference immediately. This one is sharper with a citrus kick and a faint medicinal aftertaste, like it wants to be a cough syrup when it grows up. That's my cousin's, the host whispers. She always adds too much geisha. You smile politely, it's drinkable, barely. You take smaller sips. Nearby, someone raises a toast, not with pomp, but with a wink and a half-hearted cheers. No clinking glasses, just nods. That's how Tej does celebration. Underwhelming, but satisfying. A child runs by holding a tiny barrellet filled with water, mimicking the adults. Nobody scolds him. He's part of the ritual too. You learn that no two Tej gatherings are alike. Sometimes it's a solemn affair. Other times it dissolves into dancing. Once, apparently, it ended in a debate about goat hairstyles. This one feels like a nap in glass form. You reach the bottom of your cup and notice something. The sediment. A fine layer of yeast, plant bits, and maybe a few bee legs. It's normal, they say. Texture, you decide not to stir. Instead, you admire the sunlight catching the golden swirl left behind. It's strangely beautiful, like the spiral of a galaxy, but boozier. They refill your glass. You don't object. Around you, stories begin. One woman claims Tej helped her see ghosts. Another says it cured her uncle's hiccups permanently. A man suggests the best Tej only ferments during full moons. Nobody agrees, but nobody argues either. You lean back, barrellet in hand, smile softening, and realize something. Science doesn't always need a microscope. Sometimes it lives in a glass, passed from hand to hand, one slow sip at a time. The afternoon light shifts, casting honeyed streaks across the floor. You stare down at your barrellet, now half full again. Possibly the third refill, maybe the fourth. Time has become syrupy. Conversations meander. Someone is humming. Your host leans in and points at your glass. Notice the shape, she says. It tells you how to drink. You nod, though the implications are still percolating like late-stage fermentation. The barrellet, that squat little cup, suddenly feels less like a vessel and more like a co-conspirator in a centuries-old ritual. It's not designed for chugging. It's designed for pausing. Mainstream scientific fact. The design of traditional drinking vessels often reflects the properties of the beverage they contain. The barrelet's narrow mouth limits evaporation, preserving the aromatic notes of the wild fermentation, while its bulbous base encourages swirling, which releases those same scents. You give it a tentative swirl. It looks ridiculous, like trying to decant wine in a thimble. But the smell changes. Richer, funkier, a little herbal. You get hints of gesho again, the bittering plant used in tej. Some compare it to hops. Others say it's more like licking a tree that took a philosophy course. Sitting across from you is a new guest, an elderly man with a glass twice the size of yours. He catches your glance and raises an eyebrow. "This," he says, tapping his barrel, "was my wedding cup." You raise yours instinctively. "And this was handed to me 10 minutes ago." He grins. "Same thing, more or less. Quirky or fringe tidbit. Some Ethiopian families pass down a favorite barrel through generations, believing it enhances the flavor the more memories it holds. A kind of psychological seasoning, if you will. You sip. Your cup doesn't taste ancestral, but it does taste warmer now. Maybe that's just the fourth glass talking. The old man tells you that traditionally, Tej gatherings didn't require invitations. Just the smell was enough. If you wandered into a courtyard and caught a whiff of fermenting honey, you knew you were welcome. You wonder what your neighbors would think if you tried that. Probably call the HOA. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether our olfactory memory is stronger than visual or auditory recall. But when it comes to Tej, the scent alone seems to carry generations of social bonding. Someone beside you starts playing a krar, a six-stringed lyre with gentle, hypnotic twangs. A toddler claps offbeat. A woman offers you injera, spongy and sour, perfect for soaking up both alcohol and time. No one's checking the clock. Another toast rises, this one to the bees. Everyone raises their barele. "To the bees," they cheer softly like it's a secret. You glance at the rim of your cup. There's a tiny chip you hadn't noticed before. It makes the glass feel lived in, imperfect in a way that feels more trustworthy. You swirl again, this time with purpose. The sediment clouds momentarily, then settles back like lazy snow. Your host reappears. You know if you leave some tej at the bottom, the spirits don't follow you home. You smile, that one you've heard twice now, from two different people, neither winking. You consider leaving a few drops. Outside, a breeze kicks up, rustling banana leaves. A bee floats in, hovers near the pitcher, then changes its mind and zips out. Even the bees know when enough is enough. You glance around. Half the courtyard is dozing, heads lolling like sunflowers in slow motion. The other half is telling increasingly implausible stories. Something about a lion who only drank tej. You stretch your legs and lie back, letting the warm buzz of alcohol and lyre music lull you into a state of gentle suspension. Not drunk, not sleepy, just mellow. It hits you. This entire experience has been calibrated for chill. Not excitement, not revelation, just the slow, patient unraveling of time, one sip at a time. And it all started with a funny-shaped glass. You're still reclined, vaguely aware that the sun has shifted again, its light now golden and sleepy. You hear someone humming, might be the same tune as before, might be new. Time has a way of bending things. A woman steps past, balancing a bundle of something that smells sweet and earthy. She gently sets it down beside the low table. Banana leaves, bundled, folded, slightly glossy in the late afternoon light. You sit up, curiosity tugging at your spine. "What's that?" you ask. She smiles. "Storage." Mainstream scientific fact. Before modern bottling methods, many cultures used organic materials, like banana leaves, clay jars, or beeswax linings, to store and preserve fermented drinks. These materials weren't just traditional, they provided actual microbial benefits, regulating air exposure and subtly altering flavor. She unfolds a leaf and reveals a clay jar sealed with something waxy and faintly golden. You recognize it. Beeswax. You watch as she peels the wax back, releasing a whisper of scent. Honey, earth, and a bit of smokiness. Someone beside you mutters reverently, "Aged." You peer into the jar. The tej is darker, richer, and still. No fizz, no drama, just calm, quirky or fringe tidbit. In some villages, people say techi stored in banana leaves taste more talkative, while teji sealed in beeswax becomes wise. Nobody agrees what that means, but everyone nods like it's obvious. Your host dips a ladle in and pours you a small cup. You swirl. The scent is denser this time, deeper. Less floral, more forest floor. A taste of fermentation gone meditative. Sealed for a year, she says. You nod slowly. I can taste the patience. The clay jars nearby vary wildly in shape. Some wide and squat, others tall and thin. One looks like it would tip over if you breathe too hard. You ask how long they've been in use. Generations, she says. We patch them with love. You smile. And beeswax. She grins. And that. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether natural materials like banana leaves and beeswax passively affect flavor, or if the human brain simply associates those aromas with deeper, more meaningful taste experiences. You take another sip. It's warmer now, more mellow. Maybe aged tej has the same effect as aged conversation, slower, richer, more forgiving. Nearby, a teenager is carefully pouring tej into tiny leaf-wrapped bundles, each one about the size of a cupcake. For the market, she says without looking up. Take home portions. You ask if they refrigerate it. She laughs. Tej doesn't like being cold. You laugh too, not because it's funny, but because it makes weird emotional sense. You glance around the storage area. Nothing industrial. No shelves of identical glass bottles. Just jars, leaves, wax, and people who seem completely unbothered by the absence of barcodes. You wonder how Tej would fare in a supermarket. Probably poorly. It doesn't fit in neat rows. Doesn't care for fluorescent lighting. It would rather sit quietly on a sun-warmed shelf, waiting for someone to open it slowly and ask nothing in return. Someone shouts softly from the courtyard, "Another pitcher?" "Not yet," your host replies. "Let them finish the old one." The rhythm here isn't controlled by clocks, but by the weight of jars and the warmth of conversation. There's no rush, no upsell, no need to reinvent the label every 6 months. It is, as your host says, just enough. You glance at the now empty leaf bundle beside you. It holds its shape, even without the drink. You get the odd feeling that it remembers what it carried. And somehow, that seems like enough, too. You lean back against the cool stone wall and sip what might be your 4th or 15th cup of tej. The taste has mellowed into a kind of background music in your mouth. Soft, a little floral, warm around the edges. No two pours have tasted exactly the same, and somehow that's the charm. You look around and realize something quietly shocking. All this stayed here. Mainstream scientific fact. Despite its rich cultural legacy and distinct flavor profile, tej never became a global beverage like sake, beer, or wine. Its microbial complexity and hyperlocal methods made it hard to standardize, export, or even describe on a product label. Tej isn't filtered, it isn't bottled with a carbonated flourish. It doesn't come with flavor notes etched in cursive across a frosted label. No tasting wheels, no sommelier jargon. Just drink, enjoy, repeat tomorrow. You ask someone, "Why don't you sell this outside Ethiopia?" The old man you're speaking to shrugs, then grins. Why would we? Quirky or fringe tidbit. In some parts of Ethiopia, there's a superstition that tej loses its magic if it's flown over salt water. That may explain the total lack of tej in your local international aisle. You look down into your cup, half expecting to see it sparkle. No magic, but still, something's there. A calm refusal to be rushed. An easy, deliberate echo of decisions made centuries ago and never undone. A few decades back, there was a brief moment when someone tried to commercialize Tej. Fancy bottles were designed. A logo was drafted. They called it Golden Heritage and tried to pitch it at a food expo in Berlin. It flopped. Apparently, when asked about acidity levels, one of the brewers just replied, "We don't measure that. We taste it." Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether Tej's inability to scale is due to its biological complexity or simply the stubborn beauty of cultural systems that don't want to be reduced to mass production. A slow clink draws your attention. Someone is stacking jars, carefully, lovingly. Each one has a different mark etched near the lip. Family initials, tiny symbols, even what looks like a cat. "These ones aren't for sale," says a woman nearby. "They're for the wedding next month." You nod, suddenly aware of how Tej isn't just a drink. It's a timeline, a social bookmark, a quiet participant in birthdays, blessings, arguments, rainstorms. Tej travels through families, not customs offices. You watch as someone wraps a Brele glass in soft cloth and tucks it into a leather bag. "For Grandma," they say. "She prefers it from the green cup." The green cup, not the amber one, not the clay mug, the green cup, because that's how she likes it. There's something revolutionary about that. You try to imagine Tej being turned into an energy drink. Boost with bee power, it might say. Fermented for focus. You snort into your glass. This drink doesn't want to power your productivity. It wants to sit with you while you forget what day it is. It wants you to sip and watch the shadows move across the floor. Maybe think about the bees, or don't. Tej won't be offended. You glance at the courtyard again. Same people, same sun, just a little lower now. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just peace in its rawest, stickiest, most fermented form. And that's why it stayed. Not because it couldn't go, but because it didn't want to. You're not entirely sure how you ended up following a monk up a winding path, but here you are, sandals scraping against ancient stone steps, the scent of eucalyptus and honey drifting through the air. The monastery appears like a watercolor at the top of the hill, its walls carved directly into rock, its doorway framed with faded script you can't read but somehow feel. The monk doesn't say much, just gestures for you to follow. His pace is unhurried, almost like the path is carrying him instead of the other way around. You eventually arrive at a shaded alcove where several clay vessels rest in quiet semicircles, all sealed with waxy cloth and ash. "Tej," he says finally with a small smile, "but older. Mainstream scientific fact. Monastic brewing has existed in various cultures for centuries, and Ethiopian Christian monasteries are no exception. Monks not only preserved religious texts, but also the deeply regional brewing techniques that kept Tej alive during famines, invasions, and time itself. These monks weren't just spiritual leaders, they were fermentation experts. With no digital thermometers, no yeast catalogs, and absolutely no spreadsheets, they somehow managed to make consistent, flavorful Tej that was good enough to survive centuries. You wonder if divine patience was the secret ingredient. The monk dips a ladle into one of the clay jars and pours you a small amount into a chipped cup. It smells like sunlight filtered through beeswax and wood smoke. You take a sip, and for a brief moment, everything, the leaves rustling outside, the soft chanting in the distance, the bee hovering by your elbow, feels in sync. "Some say the fermentation sings," the monk murmurs. You blink. You've read somewhere that microbial activity can emit faint ultrasonic sounds as gases escape and pressure shifts. Could that be what he means? Quirky or fringe tidbit. A few fringe researchers once proposed the idea that monks selected musical jars for brewing believing that subtle sound vibrations influenced fermentation quality. It's hard to prove, but also hard to completely dismiss when you're standing in the silence. You look around the alcove and realize how intentionally everything has been placed. Vessels are organized by age, by purpose, even by season. That one's for Lent, says the monk, pointing to a smaller jar covered with a cloth dyed pale violet. Less honey. Of course, even abstinence has nuance here. You lean against the wall, and it's cold to the touch. A shelf nearby holds a weathered manuscript that details celestial calendars and brewing cycles. You can't read it, but the symbols, moons, stars, bees, are strangely familiar now. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether ancient monastic brewers intentionally selected specific environmental microbes or whether they simply adapted to the wild cultures present in their location. Either way, the results are hard to replicate. The monk begins humming softly, a rhythmic melody that you swear matches the tempo of dripping water nearby. You realize this isn't just a monastery, it's a living fermentation lab, one that uses intuition and ritual instead of formulas. You ask, why so quiet? He chuckles, so the microbes can think. You try not to laugh, but it's impossible. Not because it's silly, but because it makes sense in a way you can't quite explain. You finish your cup and hand it back. The monk doesn't take it immediately, just looks at you and says, "Everything in this drink is older than me, older than you, older than the idea that things must move quickly." And suddenly the stillness feels like science. Not the kind written on whiteboards or published in journals, but the kind practiced barefoot, with ears open to the sound of invisible lives bubbling in clay. You thank him and walk back down the hill slowly, Tej lingering on your breath, the chant still echoing in your chest. You descend from the monastery with a head full of questions, and maybe a bit of Tej still swimming in your bloodstream. The path back winds through groves of fig trees and fields alive with the low hum of bees. Somewhere along the way, a thought sticks with you. Tej never needed to compete with European wine. You picture it, a 19th century European wine connoisseur swirling a glass, nose deep in tannins, spouting off about structure and oak finish. Then there's Tej, unfiltered, sweet, wild, poured from a clay jar into a curved glass, the shape of an upside-down light bulb. No sommelier would dare. Mainstream scientific fact, grape wine, particularly the varieties exported globally, benefits from a long history of standardization, controlled grape strains, fermentation processes, and predictable outcomes. Tej, on the other hand, thrives in unpredictability. It isn't bottled with precise alcohol percentages. It's made with whatever honey is around, whatever gesho leaves are available, and whoever happens to be in the mood to stir the jar that week. You remember the taste. It was smooth and surprising, equal parts meadow and memory. But here's the thing. Tej never needed validation. No marketing campaign, no international wine competitions, no PR firm with a catchy tagline, and it definitely wasn't trying to dethrone Merlot. Quirky or fringe tidbit, in the early 1900s, one colonial administrator in Ethiopia attempted to send samples of Tej back to Europe, hoping to spark trade interest. The samples spoiled en route. His only recorded comment, "Too spirited for the bottle," refused to be tamed. You walk past a village where laughter spills out from a home-brewing Tej in the backyard. The smell is unmistakable, sweet and yeasty, with the faint bite of fermentation. Someone hands you a cup without asking. You take a sip, and the world slows down again. That's the difference, isn't it? European wine demands ceremony. Tej offers presence. You sit on a woven mat with your cup, listening as someone explains that in Ethiopia, the point of drinking isn't intoxication. It's communion. You nod like you understand, but really you're still caught on the mental image of Tej refusing to be tamed by international shipping. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether the microbial profiles of Teji could be stabilized for mass production without losing its essence. But few agree on what that essence really is. You stretch out your legs, stare up at the sky, and wonder why some things insist on becoming global while others are perfectly content being whispered secrets. Across the mat, someone lifts their cup and says, "To the quiet drinks." You clink back, gently of course, no need to wake the microbes. You're sitting in a sun-drenched courtyard now, surrounded by the kind of silence that's not really silent. Goats bleating somewhere in the distance, kids laughing behind a curtain of drying laundry, a radio playing an old love song just barely off station. The Tej in your cup is a little cloudier than the last batch, and a bit sweeter too. This one's homemade, you can tell. The woman who brewed it, barefoot and grinning, sets down a plate of in your eye with lentils and says, "You have to eat or the Tej will keep talking." You don't ask what she means. You're not entirely sure she's joking. Mainstream scientific fact. Unlike wine grapes, which are genetically engineered for consistency, honey varies wildly from region to region, even hive to hive. What the bees pollinate changes everything: flavor, texture, even color. That makes every batch of Tej a little different, and that's the point. She tells you this batch was made with forest honey. The dark kind, she adds, holding it up to the light. Like drinking a shadow. You sip, she's not wrong. This honey came from bees that nested in trees far from here, pollinating eucalyptus, acacia, and something she just calls the blue flowers. You picture little striped diplomats zipping from petal to petal, unconcerned with your scientific curiosity. Quirky or fringe tidbit. Some Tej brewers believe that bees respond to music during honey production. A few even swear that bees produce better honey when sung to, particularly with lullabies. No peer-reviewed studies on that yet, but honestly, you kind of hope it's true. She tells you her grandmother used to leave pieces of cloth soaked in honey out on warm nights, saying it was a gift back to the sky. You don't ask whether that was symbolic or part of the brewing ritual. It seems to be both. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether environmental stress on bees, like climate shifts or pesticide exposure, directly impacts the fermentation profile of honey-based alcohols. But local brewers, they just know when the honey feels wrong. You ask how she learned to make Tej. She shrugs. Same way you learn to dance. Watch your elders. Don't rush the rhythm, and always stir clockwise. She hands you a thin stick and points to a new jar in the corner. Try it. You kneel by the jar, lift the lid. It smells alive. Not in a way that worries you. More like a bakery in the middle of a thunderstorm. You stir gently and it bubbles a little more than you expect. Like it knows you're new. Now hum, she says. You blink. Just trust me, it helps. So you hum. A low, unsure note at first. But the longer you do it, the more you feel like maybe this isn't entirely about the science. Maybe it's about presence, about showing up with a vibration your microbes can dance to. You realize there's a kind of joy in brewing something that refuses to scale up, something that can't be optimized, something that only works when you're paying attention. You hum a little louder. You wake the next morning with sunlight on your face and the lingering sweetness of Tej on your breath. No hangover, oddly enough. Just a gentle buzz in your bones, like you slept in tune with something ancient and slightly sticky. There's no alarm clock, no itinerary. Just the quiet clatter of morning teacups and the sound of bees already at work. You pad barefoot into the kitchen, where the brewer is slicing mango and humming to herself. She doesn't say good morning. She just slides you a plate and nods toward the courtyard. You should see the old apiary, she says, before the bees get shy. Mainstream scientific fact. Bees are incredibly sensitive to environmental cues, light, vibration, even mood. They've been used for centuries as early warning systems in some cultures. If the bees are angry, something's wrong. If they're sleepy, you can relax. The apiary is a low wooden structure with dozens of clay hives stacked like sleeping bags. You crouch to peek inside one and feel a wave of warm, humming air pass over your face. Not threatening, just aware. The bees don't seem to mind you. Maybe they remember your humming from yesterday. The brewer joins you, holding a small clay pot. They like you, she says. That or they're too busy to complain. You ask how long this place has been here. Quirky or fringe tidbit. She says the apiary was founded by a monk who believed bees were messengers of God. According to legend, he would tie tiny scrolls of scripture to their legs. None ever came back, she says with a wink. You sit on a log beside the hives, watching as the bees spiral in and out like punctuation marks. She spoons a bit of raw honey onto your palm. Taste it before the sun's too high, she says. This batch is from the fire season. Very smoky. You taste it. It's complex. Smoke, citrus, a little sadness, and something almost metallic at the end. She grins. That's the gesho leaf. The bitterness wakes up the sweet. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether the compounds in geisho contribute to Tej's unique microbial ecosystem or merely add flavor. But local brewers will tell you, no geisho, no Tej. You ask if she ever sells her Tej. She shakes her head. Not really, sometimes I trade for salt or stories. But Tej gets shy when it leaves home. You think about globalized foods, how sushi became mall food, how croissants show up frozen in gas stations, how mezcal is now a cocktail garnish. And here's Tej, still quietly wild. She tells you she once tried to export a bottle to a friend in France. It exploded in customs, she says, chuckling. It didn't like the pressure. There's something endearing about a drink with boundaries. A fermented thing that needs soft air and familiar hands. You dip your finger back into the honey. What happens if the bees leave, you ask. She pauses, then shrugs. Then we wait and plant more flowers. That seems fair. You head down a narrow trail after breakfast. Your steps softened by a carpet of wild thyme and volcanic soil. The brewer told you there's a village elder who remembers when the valley had more bees than people. You're curious what that looked like. Life measured in buzzes per square meter. You reach a low stone house shaded by tall false banana trees. The door is open, and inside sits an old man, legs crossed, weaving a basket and not looking particularly surprised to see you. You're the one humming to the yeast, he says without looking up. Good, sit. Mainstream scientific fact. Traditional Ethiopian beekeeping often involves cylindrical hives made of bamboo, mud, and dung, materials that regulate temperature and humidity naturally. This kind of low-tech, high-effect design has been in use for centuries, long before sustainable architecture became trendy. The elder points to a gnarled tree stump beside him. You sit. He hands you a mug that smells both fermented and floral. Another batch of Tej, but this one is sharp, tinged with lemon and something medicinal. You've never tasted rainy season honey, he says. That's why your eyebrows are confused. You nod solemnly. They are, in fact, extremely confused. Quirky or fringe tidbit. He claims certain bees prefer specific types of gossip. Talk too much about war, and they vanish, he says. Talk about weddings, and they build double hives. You're not sure he's kidding. You ask what he thinks of modern beekeeping. Metal hives, sugar water, exported honey. He grunts. Those bees don't sing anymore. Just work. That's not a life. You take another sip of Tej, which honestly tastes like it's made from raindrops and unresolved secrets. The elder leans in. You know why Tej never got famous? You blink. Because it doesn't care. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether traditional fermentation techniques, like open-air wild yeast capture, can ever be standardized without losing their microbial identity. The elder would tell you, why would you want to? He gestures to a half-finished hive under a tree. That one's for my grandson. It's his first. He thinks bees are just bugs. You ask what he told the boy. He smiles. I told him bees are the only animals that know how to cook. That sits with you. He leans back, watching a bee land on his thumb. Most people want their drinks strong, fast, predictable. He nods toward the mug. Tej waits and sings. That's why it'll never be in bars. It's not a product, it's a relationship. You stay longer than expected, sipping slowly, letting the sun do most of the talking. As you finally rise to leave, the elder calls after you. Keep humming. It makes the yeast brave. You spend the evening back at the brewery, watching the sun paint the clay walls in soft gold. The air smells like citrus peels and ash. The brewer moves quietly between jars, humming something that might be a folk song or a lullaby or both. You lean on the wooden frame of the doorway, sipping a final mug of Tej, now warm and mellow. It tastes different, sweeter than the others, with a whisper of cinnamon. You wonder aloud if she added anything extra. She tilts her head. Memory, she says. This one's fermented with yesterday. Mainstream scientific fact. Over time, yeast colonies evolve and adapt to their environment. In small, traditional fermentations, microbes may develop unique strains that never appear again outside that specific space, creating a kind of microbial fingerprint for every batch. You take another sip. This one definitely has your fingerprint in it. The brewer sits beside you and offers a slice of injera. You want to know the secret to good Tej? She asks. You nod. She grins. No clocks. Quirky or fringe tidbit. In some parts of Ethiopia, fermentation timing is determined not by hours, but by the behavior of animals, like when goats stop kicking or when birds start arguing. One family claims they know their Tej is ready when their rooster stops crowing mid-sentence. You laugh, she shrugs. That's just tradition or superstition, but either way, it works. You ask if she's ever thought about writing a book. She grimaces. Tej isn't a recipe, it's a conversation, and books don't listen very well. Open scientific debate phrase. Scientists still argue whether codifying oral fermentation traditions into written form preserves culture or sterilizes it. Some suggest that the act of formalizing inherently erodes the nuance of intuitive craft. You finish your mug slowly, letting the last of the sun slip below the hills. A fire is lit outside. The brewer places a clay pot at its edge, one more batch warming gently in the amber glow. As the stars prick the sky, you lie back against a woven mat and listen. There are no cars, no buzz of electronics, just the crackle of fire, a chorus of distant frogs, and the whispery hum of bees returning late. Your eyelids begin to flutter. She drapes a light shawl over you. Stay until morning, she says. The yeast likes dreaming with company. You're not sure if she's kidding. You drift off wondering, how many drinks in the world still have lullabies? Now, as you lie there beneath a sky thick with stars and the faint scent of wild honey, let your body soften into the quiet hum of the night. The fire fades to embers. The last bees tuck themselves into clay hives. In the distance, a drumbeat echoes like a heartbeat, slow and steady, centuries old, still pulsing beneath the silence. You inhale the cool night air, Tinged with the ghost of fermented flowers and sun-warmed soil, the yeast has gone still now. The tej rests. The story for tonight has nothing more to prove. Let your breath match the rhythm of the earth, slow and unrushed. Let the taste of honey wine dissolve in memory until even that becomes mist. There's nothing left to solve, no drama to untangle, just the strange, soothing truth that someone, somewhere, once sang to a pot of fermenting mead and called it enough. That's the whole story. You don't need to understand every step or trace every molecule. You just need to rest. So close your eyes and let the bees do the work for once.